Hi everyone, I'm Sophie Brannan. I am a Senior SEO Manager at Absolute Digital Media. I'm incredibly grateful to be here, part of this great virtual conference today, and I'm going to be speaking all about passage indexing and why you should actually care about it. So 2020 was one hell of a year, right? I mean, outside of SEO, we had fires, forest fires, we had explosions, we had riots and protests, and we had Kobe Bryant dying, which was horrific if you're a basketball fan. And then, of course, the dreaded pandemic, which still to this day is haunting our daily lives. But then inside of the world of SEO, Google didn't really make it that much easier either. So they disabled the request indexing feature on Search Console, which is my go-to tool, and they got rid of it. And it was a nightmare. But okay, yeah, they gave it back as an early Christmas present, but it would have been nice to have it there the entire time. They released a number of algorithm updates and broad calls, the December one, and we know that most YMYL sites, some had good impact, some had a really bad impact. It totally depends on the website. So that was also really not needed. So thanks for that, Google. And then they also gave us that deadline of May 2021 for the page experience update. So yeah, we've got that to look forward to as well. So yeah, it's fine. It's fine. We'll be fine. No worries, no worries. But what am I actually going to talk about today? So with a year as crazy as 2020 has been, it's likely that you may know of passage indexing. You may have seen the tweets and things like that in the past and over the last few months, but like so many, and including myself, having the actual time to look into it over the last few months since it was originally announced has been a little bit scarce. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking you through what exactly is passage indexing, what it will mean for your SEO efforts, and what you can do to actually benefit your content. So what is passage indexing? So passage-based indexing is a change to Google's algorithm, which enables the search engine to identify individual passages on a page and process them as possibly being the most relevant for a given search query, even if they aren't actually part of the main theme of the page. So it's important to note, however, that in October 2020, Google did confirm on Twitter that this change doesn't actually mean that they're indexing individual pages independently. They're still indexing pages and considering all of the information for the ranking. However, they're starting to consider passages from pages as an additional ranking factor as well. So this change in the algorithm is expected to apply to about 7% or so of search queries across all languages when it's fully rolled out. So that doesn't really sound like a lot though, right, does it? But, rolled out from about 10% to nearly 100% of search queries in a year. So, I mean, I wouldn't take that 7% so lightly. But let's break it down a little bit further. So Google stated as part of their Twitter thread that the reason for this update was because while all content on a web page is evaluated to determine if it's relevant to a query, sometimes pages can be very long or about multiple topics, particularly if it's something that I have written, because I am a nightmare for that. In cases like this, it's really easy for a page to end up diluting its relevancy for particular search queries. Passage-based indexing basically allows Google to better identify and understand those key passages on a web page. This can then help the search engine to surface content that might not otherwise be seen as relevant when considering the whole page. So that's pretty cool, right? But where did the confusion come from? So when passage indexing was first announced by Google, there was a bit of confusion around the semantics of their announcement, as with most of the announcements that they make, particularly when they turned around and said, now we are able to not just index web pages, but individual passages from those pages. So hang on a minute, does this mean that they're separately indexing pages or passages, or like, what are they doing? Panic stations. Fortunately, no. So Google did clarify that it's not the case that they are separately indexing passages. The indexing hasn't changed, just Google's ability to pass out the relevant passage that may be well down a page, and they may not have actually stood a chance of ranking before because it's been so diluted by the rest of the page itself. Hopefully that makes sense. But why should you actually care? So 7% of searches, like I mentioned earlier, it may not seem like a huge amount, but that's 7% of searches globally. So there should still be a noticeable impact when this update is fully rolled out. On top of this, passage indexing could also be helping to leverage BERT, and we now know that BERT applies to 100% of searches, well, almost. So this way, it's intertwining and it's giving BERT an opportunity to just like thrive even further and find new ways to influence how Google is ranking as a search engine. So the way this intertwines is actually through BERT's limitations. So to quote 2020's pre-trained Transformers for Text Ranking BERT and Beyond, which is fantastic, by the way, if you haven't read it, BERT has trouble with input sequences longer than 512 tokens for a number of reasons. The obvious solution, of course, is to split text into passages. So you're starting to see the connection? Because BERT has limitations in long documents, passages are looking to be the ideal place to start when it comes to intent detection-led search, and Google's understanding of connections between content and user search intent. So what can you actually do to benefit from passage-based indexing? Well, the short answer is absolutely nothing, if you're doing the right things in the first place, which we all know is difficult because when it comes to SEO, it depends, and it's my favourite phrase, and I say it to my clients possibly every single day. Yeah, one of those things. On top of that, Google actually came out and stated that there's nothing that content creators actually need to do in order to benefit from passage-based indexing other than to continue to create great content. But we all know that there's something you can do, right? So we refer back to Google's basic principles, going back through the documentation, going back through their guidelines. It's all fun and games when it comes to any kind of Google algorithm update, isn't it? So looking back at their guidelines, we make pages primarily for users, not for search engines. So this is going way back to BERT. This is going back to anything to do with user intent, search intent, really looking at if a user is searching for something, like what is that and what are they actually trying to get out of it at the end of the day? If they're searching for, I don't know, Facebook, then you know they're probably looking to find Facebook. It makes a lot of sense, but you'll be surprised at the amount of times people will just write content for the sake of it and stuff it with keywords for search engines like the old days and not for users. But if you're making your pages primarily for users and not for search engines, then you're going to be ticking all of the boxes when it comes to everything Google wants to see. Don't deceive your users. So this is more when looking at ads, looking at kind of the way a page is laid out, making sure there's nothing hidden and you're not deceiving your users within the actual content itself. But making sure that you don't deceive your users should really just be self-explanatory. Avoid tricks intended to improve search engine rankings. This is still something that as an SEO I see almost every day, whether that's backlinks that are used to manipulate people's search engine rankings, whether that is keyword stuffing within content because people still think it works. And I mean, I'm sure there's some industries where it does because Google hasn't quite caught that up yet, but you really don't want to be doing that because you're going to put a significant risk of a penalty on the website that you're working on. There are a number of tricks that people are using in order to try and improve their search engine rankings, but the way Google's evolving with BERT, with the machine learning, with the AI, it's only going to end up backfiring on you at the end of the day. Think about what makes your website actually unique, what makes it valuable, what makes it super engaging. Why should your users actually want to be on your website? And that's really what's going to help when it comes to just generally the performance of your website, when it comes to SEO, when it comes to ranking in Google search results. But we all know that that's not necessarily going to be easy. And we know as well at the end of the day that there's so much more that you can be doing, particularly when Google brings out an update like passage indexing. So what else? What else can you do? Well, one of the big things that I've been pushing for since 2013 in the agency I work in, since Hummingbird, and just generally because as a content writer originally, before I moved into SEO, just writing content that is stuffed with keywords, particularly location-based keywords, which is the bane of my life, or at least it was when I was writing content. Just moving away from that, it just makes content so much nicer. It makes it easy to read, and it's one of the big things that's really going to pick up as part of passage indexing, and how passage indexing is really trying to leverage BERT as well. So moving away from the X number of keyword mentions on a page approach is seriously going to help when it comes to ranking those passages. The idea behind passage indexing is that Google's going to get a better understanding of individual sections of your page. So it doesn't actually matter how many keyword mentions you've got in that page, because Google's going to understand the relevancy of a particular section now as well. So just moving away from that, it's going to help you really to adhere to those basic Google guidelines of making pages primarily for users and not search engines, and also avoiding tricks to try and deceive and kind of improve your search engine rankings as well. But generally, it's going to help with your overall ranking when this passage indexing update really comes into play. On top of that, align your content strategies with intent research practices. So we mentioned search intent and user intent a little bit earlier on in the presentation, but there are so many types of intent that you should really think about, and every single piece of content that you're creating really should be about what is your user trying to get out of the search that they've put into Google. If they were to land on your page, is it going to answer not necessarily the question that just they are looking for, but anyone who may land on that page? Is it ticking all of the boxes? If it's transactional search intent, is it answering the questions that potentially they want to see? So are they more likely to buy if they've got all of the information on price, on the product description itself when it comes to e-commerce websites? Or if it's a lead gen website, are you really prompting them to kind of convert and fill out the form, not just because you're flashing the form in their face, but because you're actually answering the questions that they might have within the content as well? Making sure that you align your content strategies with intent research practices is only going to help when it comes to passage indexing as well, because passage indexing is really going to help to leverage BERT, and it's really going to help to leverage the whole idea of user intent when it comes to how Google's ranking. Making sure that your website page and the content itself has a clear structure and focus is going to be more important than ever. So this is something that's been so important for so many years, mostly from an SEO perspective in terms of having your H1 tag, having a number of optimized H2s and breaking it down like that. But when it comes to BERT, when it comes to passage-based indexing, particularly with long form content, making sure that the structure of the web page is clear so the bots can read it nicely and it can really pick out those key passages, that's really going to help. And going back to kind of user intent, making sure that it's easy for people to read. No one, including me, including you, wants to sit there and read thousands and thousands and thousands of words on a page if it's just jumbled and there's no structure and you can't navigate through it really well. Even it could be the best guide in the world, but ultimately if it's just blocks of text, then I'm not going to want to read it either. And that means that ultimately at the end of the day, so many other people are not going to read it themselves. So making sure that the actual content is clear, it's structured, it's focused, it has really significant headers, it's got proper passages in place. These are all of the things that are going to help, particularly with the long form content, when it comes to the passage-based indexing. So what are the key takeaways here? So as AI and machine learning within Google's algorithm continues to improve, passage ranking and passage, what's known as re-ranking with BERT, So this is a concept that's covered in the book that I mentioned earlier. Definitely give that a read. It's going to continue to be a hot topic in the world of information retrieval, machine learning, language research, all as part of SEO. There is so much to know about passage indexing and how it's leveraging BERT and how machine learning is going to influence the algorithms. But it's really important that we're just keeping this to the basics and we're just leveraging the whole concept of passage-based indexing to really benefit our content. So while the rollout may be small at first, at around 7% of global searches, that doesn't mean that passage-based indexing should be ignored. In the same way that BERT evolved very quickly to 100% of searches, we really do expect to see passage-based indexing doing the same thing. On top of this, passage-based indexing is likely to fill in the gaps that BERT really just can't quite cover when it comes to particularly long-form content. If BERT's already struggling when it comes to crawling the long-form pages and it only has a certain number of tokens that it can use in order to really get to grips with what that page is about, then ultimately passage indexing is going to fill in those gaps and it's going to pick out those key points within the content, and it's those that are going to begin to start ranking as well, not just the page as a whole. So passage indexing will also revolve around the depth of content on a page, really lessening the importance of those keyword themes, which is what I mentioned earlier about just moving away from that X number of keywords within a piece of content, because that's just not, it just doesn't matter anymore. When it comes to passage indexing, it's about, does that little snippet of text answer that person's question? If it does, boom, you're going to be up there. You're going to be in the featured snippet. So while it's not quite a big, scary algorithm update or change, I mean, we have that fun to come in May with the Core Web Vitals update, so really looking forward to that one. But passage indexing is definitely something to keep at the top of your agenda and really be a core focus of your content strategy in 2021, particularly when it comes to reviewing your content, whether that's existing content, whether that's new content that you're creating, particularly from an intent perspective. So really just making sure that you are going back through all of the content on your website and just using it as a way to answer the questions that your users are looking for. Make sure you're ticking all of those boxes, whether their intent is navigational, whether it's transactional, whether it's informational. It doesn't matter. You need to make sure that the content on your website really is just answering those questions for those users. Thank you. So thank you for taking the time to listen to my talk today. If you have any questions about passage indexing and how to adapt your content strategy in line with this to really further benefit from it, then feel free to contact me on Twitter @Sophie Brannan. I'd be more than happy to have a chat.